The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, and welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne. Coming up, organizations are advocating for new legislation ensuring the protection of those under 18 when encountering law enforcement with the initiative #Right to Remain Silent. BronxConnect and Legal Aid Society joins me for discussion on this initiative. How could this legislation protect inner city youth? After that, supermarkets, gas stations, and more are all experiencing inflation. A senior tax partner joins me for discussion on what you can do to beat these rising costs. How will inflation affect families in the Bronx? Then, in an effort to promote literacy, #The Bronx is Reading will host a book festival. The founder and executive director of The Bronx is Reading joins me to discuss the importance of book accessibility in the Bronx. What can Bronxites expect to see at the book festival? And finally, following the effects of inflation, New York City taxi, Uber, and Lyft drivers are finding it difficult to make a decent living. Joining me to discuss the steps needed to further support drivers during this time is Executive Director of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. How has the driving workforce been affected by inflation? So please stick around. Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin, Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. #Right to Remain Silent is a campaign aimed to protect youth interrogated by police. Now, organizations are advocating for new legislation ensuring the protection of those under 18 when encountering law enforcement. Organizations BronxConnect and Legal Aid Society joined me for a discussion on this initiative. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you. Great being here. Thank you.
Now, can you tell me about your organization, BronxConnect?
We'd love to. Well, our organization is actually Urban Youth Alliance, and Urban Youth Alliance started in 1970, and it really was a strong youth work, and it was engaging students within the local community and the local church community to establish strong leaders. And then in 1999, we got this challenge, and the challenge came from public and private ventures, and the question was, could the local church, the Christian church, have an impact on those who are court involved and justice involved? And thus in 1991, ATI was formulated, which is our alternative to incarceration program, and shortly thereafter, our ATD program. And we've gladly served the youth and the young adults of the Bronx.
Now, one of your most recent initiatives is #Right to Remain Silent. Can you tell me more about that?
This initiative was a very important initiative that started over 3 years ago. It was an initiative that was spearheaded by the Legal Aid Society, and BronxConnect, we came along for it. One of the things that we realized was that our young people were running into an issue when facing interrogations. And the biggest points, and if I can, I guess, put this in a nutshell for what this bill says, is this bill basically takes any questions out of it. The right away, as soon as the police come and take a young person and begin to take them into interrogation, they first have to connect them with legal assistance. So they first have to go and whether it's over the phone or whether it's in person, they have to be able to speak to a lawyer. This takes it out of the young people's hands. It takes it out of the the police hands, because one of the things that we also realize is that with young people, they're being that they're young and their brains are still developing, making the decisions on the moment is a little tougher. So this makes the process automatic. So again, in a nutshell, what it says is that police have to connect a young person with legal assistance at the moment of at the moment that they're detained and being brought into interrogation.
Now, Lisa, can you explain why there is a need for this?
So there's a need for this because, as anyone who has parented a teenager knows, young people do not understand what it means to waive a constitutional right. They don't understand the long-term import of that decision. And so just like you wouldn't want your own child to be in a police interrogation room, having the police explain to them what their rights are and having them make that decision on their own, you know, people that can afford private counsel do so, but all children should have a right to private counsel. This is a constitutional right. So I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. All children should have a right to counsel at that stage and do have a right to counsel at that stage. They just don't understand that they have the right to counsel at that stage. So this is essential in order to protect the constitutional rights of children.
Now, what typically happens in situations where kids and teens are interrogated by police?
So typically what happens is that a police officer is allowed to lie to a young person. It's legally permitted. And they can say things to them like, if you cooperate, we will work with the DA to go, easier on you. Or if you tell us what happened, you'll be able to go home. So young people are particularly susceptible to that kind of coercive environment. And so typically more than 90% of young people waive their right to remain silent and go ahead and make statements that can then go on to be used against them.
Can you explain why this may be challenging for some young people?
Why it may be challenging for young people to be interrogated by the police?
Well, why it's challenging that for them to understand that they're waiving their rights or that they don't have to say anything.
Well, as I mentioned, the police are allowed to lie to them. And often, for instance, a parent may be there and may think that it's in their child's best interest to cooperate with authorities, that they need to appear cooperative, that that's important, even if it isn't in the child's best interest. So young people in particular don't understand the long-term consequences of that decision. They think, oh, if I do something now, it will help me right now, without thinking about what the implications are for down the road when they're in court. And in fact, the research shows that young people falsely confess at a higher rate than adults do, because again, they don't understand the long-term implications. They want to say whatever they think it is that the authorities want them to say, because they think that will help get them, able to go home.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. I did not know that, and it's pretty just crazy. So thank you for sharing that. Now, you mentioned this before. What does it mean to have a right to counsel?
Well, what this bill provides is that when a young person is arrested and is going to be interrogated, because that's when these rights kick in. They only kick in when you're going to be interrogated by the police. This would entitle that young person to speak to an attorney, either by phone or in person, so that that attorney could explain to them thoroughly and advise them about their legal rights. So just like I was mentioning earlier, if my child were arrested, I would immediately call for a private attorney because I could afford one, and have that person represent the child at the time of interrogation. But most people, by far the majority of people, cannot afford attorneys and do not have representation at the time that they are being interrogated by the police. And so essentially the police are able to take advantage of the fact that children don't understand their rights, and as a result waive that right. And this would instead ensure that they are given the protection that they need of this constitutional right that we are all supposed to have.
Now, I understand that this was inspired by the Exonerated Five. BronxConnect, can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Yeah, sure. So, as we all know, the experience that the Exonerated Five went through was horrific. It was an injustice towards the process, and it really gave a black eye to the legal system here and how we handle things. So when in coming up with this bill, I know that the thinking was we want to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. Unfortunately, this is a situation that's not just a one-off. It's not just, hey, it happened to these five, but the reality is that it's happening every single day. I've gotten a chance to speak to some of the young people here, even at BronxConnect, and they hearing them talk about their experiences with interrogations. It's mind blowing. As an adult, I'm in my 40s now, and if I were pulled in front of the police and some of the tactics that we use, I don't know how I will respond. So so this bill really protects, as Lisa was mentioning, it protects the young people. It protects the young people of our community and helps us to give them a way out. A lot of times, they don't have a way out. Not really having access, as Lisa mentioned, to legal aid of their own lawyers, or not even knowing that, hey, you know what, I can say no to police. This is a bill that is much needed for this time.
I really appreciate the fact that you brought up that you wouldn't even know how to handle that situation, because I think that is just a very real thing. I love that it's geared towards children and younger people, but I think there are so many people who just don't understand that. That kind of leads into my next question. What effect do you think this bill would have on Black and Latin communities just overall in New York City?
I'd love
So I
to.
think, oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Lisa. If I might add, forgive me, Lisa, if I might add, I think it's an excellent question when you ask what effect we think the bill would have on the Black and Brown community. I just want to add that during the time when we were referring to these young men as the Central Park Five, I was actually a student at John Jay College. I want to add that at the time when this arrest was going on, I lived in East Harlem. I lived in Taft Projects, and many of these young people lived only blocks from me in either direction, east or the west. And my brother went to school with one of the young men. And one of the things that we all were sitting on our seats about, and one of the things that alarmed us greatly was the fact that they were minors. One of the things that we wanted was someone to jump up and save them. And although their parents had what was in their best interest, they were in a sense duped by the system. And so, what do we think? Some of the effect would be young people not being taken advantage of, young people not being pressured and duped into confessing to something maybe that they had not done. It would be us as a society protecting young people. What would be in the best interest of the child? And it is surely not giving up your rights to comply with maybe a lie because you're now feeling afraid and pressured, and you're afraid that you may not go home. So one of the effects would truly be maybe less young people entering the justice system. And Lisa, I hope you jump right in and continue on.
I think everything that you said is exactly right. The reality in New York City, in particular, is that the vast majority of people who are arrested are young men of color, and they are people that don't come from communities of privilege and therefore don't have the benefit of a private attorney. And so this is really making real the constitutional right that we are all supposed to have, even for people who don't have money. And that should be what justice is about, right? A level playing field for everyone.
So we have about 2 minutes left. I really want to know what could be done to further educate these communities and these young people on what to do in these situations. And do you think this should be talked about in schools?
I love that question because first, we always believe that a strong community should worry about the least of these, right? Those individuals who have less or the most vulnerable. So I do believe that we have a responsibility to the minors in our city. We have a responsibility to those who are not as socioeconomically well off, right? To allow there to be a level playing field. And I do think that schools is they're just still that gathering place. They should still be the place of learning and protection. And I would say that local schools, right, from middle school and up, we should always equip them with the information that's needed to protect themselves. I believe it would just be so valuable that from the age of or the grade of seventh grade on, that we're giving the community, that we're giving students this information, and maybe even the parents at parent teacher conference nights, because again, we want to equip the communities.
All right, well, I want to thank you all so much for joining me to discuss this really important topic.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. Nearly every aspect of our lives has been affected by inflation. Joining me for a discussion on what this means moving forward and how we can beat inflation is Jeff Almanzar, Senior Tax Partner for the Commission ENT LLC. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Kibin. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Excited to be here again and doing this once again with you is always fun.
Awesome. So let's jump right into it. Can you just explain what is inflation?
Uh, so I would say the most simplest way to explain inflation is basically when you go into a store and the prices are a lot higher than they were before. So there's something called supply and demand, right? So when you have a scarcity of a certain product, then the price of that product is going to go up. So you're going to see a lot of the cars right now going up, rental properties going up, houses going up, and produce in the stores going up due to the scarcity, and a lot of it has to do with imports and exports and you know taxes, foreign exchanges. So there's a lot of different variables that goes into inflation that each one of these monikers can affect the prices of rising. So I would say the simplest way to explain it is just when you have a supply and demand change within the economy.
Now, is that the main reason why this is happening, or are there some other reasons why we're seeing inflation?
So inflation is an economic journey that can go back 40, 50 years, and it pretty much cycles around the whole economic system. So at any point, at any given time during the whole life cycle of an economic lifespan, a recession, an inflation, an economic boom, an economic crash, it's just part of the whole economic lifespan. So no matter what we do, no matter how we live our lives, these cycles are going to happen. These cycles are going to come. So it's just a matter of what we do in order to react to the inflation. But yes, there's certain things that can affect it, but I wouldn't say affect it. I would say, I guess, give you a notion that is coming. You know that, okay, I see prices are going up. Um, you have wages that are not meeting the inflation. So if the price of food is at a certain price, but the wages and jobs aren't going up, then you're not meeting supply and demand when it comes to purchase power. So people start to feel the heaviness of them having to purchase certain products if their income is not going up. So it's a lot when it comes to explaining what actually triggers it. Is a very very long, comprehensive um, explanation. But these little things, supply and demand, going to the store, seeing scarcity of food, and seeing prices going up. Those are the little things that can let you know that there's some type of inflation happening.
Now, how is inflation measured? Because I think that when we look at just everything in general, over years things have always been going up. But how do you know when you're actually experiencing inflation?
Right. So again, is a matter of having prices go really really high really really rapidly, and a lot of it can be triggered. Let's say, for instance, we just came from a pandemic, where in this pandemic there was a lot of influx of income being injected into the economy, which the domino effect to that was that a lot of people were purchasing. So the more people are purchasing, the less products are available. Therefore, the prices are going to go up, and then people are going to pay for it because there's an influx of income in the economy. Um, so that's another trigger that can create prices to go up. Um, Same thing with gasoline. There's a lot more people that are out there, purchasing more gas, so there's less gas to go around. So a lot of these things trigger, the inflation of it going up. And if you go back into the 80s, there was interest rates were like 20%, which is nowhere near where it is now. But some of us weren't even born, some of us were very small to understand what that was. And at the same time, people weren't purchasing as much as they are today. Like the consumer, I guess, culture, I would call it, the consumer culture right now is a lot higher than what it used to be. Right now you have your Apple Pay, you have, like, it's so easy for you to make a purchase right now that you don't even feel it. Like having tangible cash in your hand and just tapping your phone on any product that you want to buy, it's not the same feeling. Like, a lot of people buy off emotion as well. So there's a lot of triggers that inflation um creates. And then right now, then we're going to go ahead and deal with how to deal with inflation coming back down.
That's interesting. I'm really happy that you kind of brought that up because I did hear a lot of people say something very similar. And it kind of leads to my next question just about consumerism. How do you think, well, first, this is a nationwide problem. How do you think this is going to affect low income families?
So it's going to affect a lot of low income families because let's say if they qualify for certain government help that they were getting, let's say $200 before, now they're forced to get more money from the government because $200 at the supermarket is not going to get them what they used to get $200 before, because everything in the supermarket is a lot higher, and everything that the supermarket was able to get at a cheaper price, now the supermarket is paying a lot more money for it as well. So everything is a domino effect. The more expensive things are for the business owner, then the more expensive things are going to be for the consumer, because they have to keep the doors open. Um, so at the end of the day, when you're very low income, there's just so much that you can do. You want to try to save, you want to try to spend less, and just worry about the four most important things, which is where you live, where you eat, your light and clothes. So I guess you start prioritizing and having the most important things that you have to worry about, and leaving a lot of these extracurricular stuff, for when times get better. You know.
Now, the Bronx has the highest rate of poverty in New York City. How will this affect a community that was already struggling with the cost of living even before the pandemic and before inflation?
Uh, I think if anything, the Bronx is one of the most resilient boroughs. You could even call it. It's probably bigger than most cities in New York, in the United States. Sorry. So the Bronx, another thing is hearsay, and another thing is to when I say hearsay, I mean social media and the news, and obviously we're speaking, we're communicating via these social networks, but it's also um going out into the street and looking at what's happening. Going into a supermarket, going into the schools, and the Bronx is hustling and bustling, and people are out there, and they're moving. They're looking for jobs. They're moving into new apartments. So the rents are not going any lower. They're going higher. So it, there's some people that are always going to struggle, but there's always people that are going to rise above. So if you're looking for all the opportunities to go to school, to find a job, to already have in mind the next job that's going to be better than the last one, to make even more money, and then to eventually become a homeowner. I believe poverty is a state of where you're at in the moment, but it's not the state where you stay for the rest of your life. At some point you are in a system where you're low income, but while you're going through that, you are thinking about how I'm going to get better, and how I'm going to do better, how I'm going to do better for my kids. It's just a natural human, reaction of just human nature, that you want to do better for yourself and your kids. So all the help is out there. Obviously there's always more to do, but at the end of the day is just us doing what we need to do for ourselves, and using these tools and this help to rise above it, and eventually just live a better life every single day.
Now, what are some financial tips you can offer that can help people better manage their money during this time?
Well, one thing that I was touching on was the technology. Sometimes technology is great, but at the same time, it can also hinder your pockets, because you know when you make things so easy to spend money, then you're going to spend the money. And sometimes, if you don't have a good grasp of what a budget is, if you're making 500, 1,000 a week, or 300 a week, it's the same thing. If you don't know how to manage it, if you have certain percentages that you say, okay, my rent is, this is how much my light is, this is how much I spend on food, and you emotionally want to eat out all the time. Now you're using credit cards, and now every month that goes by, you're putting yourself into more debt and more debt and more debt. You're not only, making yourself suffer, you're also making your future self, you know, suffer the consequences of the actions that you're taking today. So I, one of the biggest things that I see with social media is a lot of people comparing their lives to others. You have to really be true to yourself and say, okay, this is what I want for my life, and have that discipline to not care what other people are doing, and eat at home. You don't have to spend these crazy money on clothing or cars. Just get what you need now, and then in the future you're going to reap the benefits of all your hard work and discipline, and being able to be patient, with yourself, while you grow. So I would surround myself with like-minded people, people that would enjoy your company, to have a glass of wine that probably costs $20, instead of you know spending a bunch of money on something that you're going to do the same exact thing, with spending time with people. So little things like that.
Now, what can people do to stay up to date with you and kind of get some more tips?
They can definitely always contact me on my website, commissiontax.com. And this is definitely a matter that is a one-to-one basis, because everybody's life is not a one size fits all. So I'm definitely getting a lot of clients that have their own situations that we're able to assess on a one-to-one. So that is definitely something that is very beneficial for everyone. And I enjoy doing that and helping everybody, and it's always a pleasure speaking to you, Kibin. So thank you for always having me.
Thank you so much for joining us and bringing us this information. We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Hello and welcome back to Open BxRx Tuesday. With a mission to promote literacy in the Bronx, organization The Bronx is Reading will host their annual Bronx Book Festival. Joining me to discuss this effort is Saraciea J. Fennell, founder and executive director of The Bronx is Reading. But first, let's take a look at this clip of Saraciea telling us more about her organization.
What's up, y'all? My name is Saraciea J. Fennell. I'm the founder of The Bronx is Reading, and I'm here to tell you that there's a literary revolution happening here in the Bronx. Since 2009, I've had the dreams and aspirations to open a children's bookstore here in the Bronx. The Bronx is Reading promotes literacy and fosters a love of reading among children, teens, and adults through our multi-dimensional programming, such as the Bronx Book Festival, our literacy program that brings free books and authors into Title I schools, our monthly book club, and our pop-up and online bookstore. Today, our programming serves over 1.5 million people. 600,000 of those are children and teens. However, the Bronx still suffers from the lowest literacy rates.
Saraciea, thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Now, can you tell us about your organization, The Bronx is Reading?
Yeah, absolutely. The Bronx is Reading celebrates literacy, fosters a love of reading among children, teens, and adults, empowering the next generation of readers and writers through our multi-dimensional initiatives, including our annual Bronx Book Festival, which is this weekend, celebrating 5 years. The Bronx is Reading literacy program that brings free books and authors into low-income schools, our monthly book club, and our online and pop-up bookstore.
So I think it's amazing that you're now hitting 5 years. That's awesome. Can you just tell us how this book festival actually began?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work in book publishing, during my 9 to 5, and I have had the opportunity as a publicist to travel across the U.S. with authors and illustrators attending fantastic festivals like the Texas Book Festival or Houston Teen Book Con, and even Brooklyn Book Festival, which is just across, just across the bridge. Brief train ride. I'm not lying. It's not brief. It's about an hour. But these wonderful literary events were happening all across the U.S. And I kept wondering, why do I have to leave the Bronx to experience a wonderful bookish event like this? And so, there was a huge outcry when Barnes & Noble closed, and I wasn't quite ready to quit my job. And so I decided, I'm not ready to, go full force to open up a bookstore, but what can I do for my community that will show them that I'm here for them. I see them. I see us. We do read books. We love meeting authors and illustrators in person. And so I decided to, create the Bronx Book Festival. And after that, we had our first event in 2018, and so many people came up to me saying, when's the next one? Are you doing this, the following weekend? And I was like, no, book festivals are really hard to plan. A lot goes into it. So this is sort of our yearly programming and cultivating panels and programming to finally, debut for just a span of 1 to 2 days. So a lot goes into it. But I'm really excited that we're celebrating our 5th year, and it's wild to me that it's even happening in person after 2 years of virtual programming. We're finally going to be back outdoors at Fordham Plaza, and getting free books into folks' hands, but also selling books at the plaza, as well as just enjoying wonderful programming.
Now, can you detail the moment that inspired you to get involved in children's literacy just in general?
Yes. So I actually would be classified, I guess, as a reluctant reader when I was younger. But I ended up in foster care, and I started reading a lot to kind of, cope with being alone and being away from my family. And what I noticed was books really empowered me to just escape what was happening in the real world, and, to read and learn about other cultures. I read a ton of fantasy, a ton of mystery books. Roald Dahl was one of my favorites. Octavia E. Butler, for example, one of my favorites. And so I've always had this love of books, this love of literature. But it wasn't until I started working in book publishing as a publicist that I realized authors were real live people. They were real life people. You could go and meet them at a bookstore. You could get your book signed. You could have a conversation with them. I had no idea that that existed. I didn't think that these, were real life people. And so that, really pushed me to want to create an organization, create a festival where young people could meet these wonderful creators, specifically creators that look like me. So Black and brown illustrators and writers, and bringing them into, these low income schools, bringing them into the Bronx community so that they could see, right? Because representation matters. And I want more young people to fall in love with books, and to, they're the next generation that's going to change the world. So we have to make sure that they are well informed, and you can do that by knowledge, right? Reading books.
Now, you talked about like meeting these authors and illustrators, and I think that I like that you brought that up, because I do think growing up, it kind of feels like these are, in a weird way, celebrities that you'll never get to see these people, right? And I think it's so amazing that kids actually get a chance to meet these people who probably did influence, their childhoods. Can you just talk about why it's so important, especially for children?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's especially important for children because their minds are still being molded. They are trying to figure out, how they're going to lead their life in the world, right? They're always looking up to people. They're going to implement what the elders in the community are doing, and so seeing these types of jobs and letting them know that this is a viable way for you to make money. There are jobs in the art. I know for me specifically, my mom is an immigrant from Honduras, and so saying I wanted to be a writer or, be an artist, that's not, seems like a very wealthy kind of job. It doesn't seem like you're going to get paid. And so for a lot of families like that, and low income families, they want their children to get a job that is going to, pay well, so that they can take care of themselves, so that they can pay rent and buy food and etc. And so showing young people, specifically children of color, right, and also children from the Bronx in general, that, hey, this is a real person who illustrated this book, who wrote this book, and they are traveling the US, they're traveling the world, getting paid, to share their art. Like, these types of jobs actually do pay, and you can have so much fun doing it. And so for me, it's definitely showing them that representation matters. But in addition to that, the publishing industry is, 80% white. And so it's really important that these young people, right, grow up to become people who want to work in industries like this. And so I want them to see that, oh, maybe I don't want to be a writer, maybe I don't want to be an illustrator, but I want to, have a hand in creating something beautiful like that, right? Something that's timeless, that can live on a bookshelf, that you can share, not just with yourself, but with your friends and your family. So maybe you want to be an editor. Maybe, you want to be on the marketing team, on the publicity team. And so I find that specifically hosting more events that are geared towards young people, it just opens up their universe of the different types of options, right, that they can aspire to be when they become, adults in the world.
Now, this is just one aspect of the festival. Can you tell me more about what people can expect when they visit the Bronx Book Festival?
Yes, so we are so excited, like I said, to be back at Fordham Plaza this weekend on Saturday, June 11th. We have programming from 10 a.m. to about 6 p.m. So you can expect to come and listen to storytime events. You can come and expect to get a free book. Yes, you heard right, free book. And we have free books for all ages, obviously mainly for young people because we want young people to go ahead and build their home libraries. We will also have books available for purchase for any of the participating authors and illustrators that will be doing programming at the book festival. We have panels. We have some publishing professionals that are going to talk about what it's like to work in book publishing. And then I know that, the Bronx has a wonderful, wonderful community of content creators or people who maybe want to be content creators. So we have a panel that is dedicated towards, ways that you can kind of get products for free, review them, and do wonderful, product shots and things like that. Because, I feel like the Bronx is full of entrepreneurs and we all love free stuff. But,
Yes.
very talented community too. So get you some free books, take pictures and things like that, and figure out how to join, the social media content creator, influencer community surrounding books.
That's really cool. Now, as of now, we only have one bookstore in the Bronx. Can you tell me about your efforts to bring a children's bookstore to our borough?
Oh man, I'm so bummed every time I hear one bookstore, right? 1.5 million people, and there's one bookstore servicing, this entire borough. And so my efforts to bring a children's and general interest bookstore to Fordham Road specifically, I want people to come from all parts of the Bronx and feel like they can step into a bookstore that, serves them, where they can come in and be in community with other readers, where they can browse shelves and get book recommendations from booksellers, where they can, listen to events, where we can have storytime events, poetry events, listen to writers talk about their books. And then, of course, my absolute favorite is the book signing. Right? That is one of the major key differences from a library event, right? Is getting to meet the author and get your book signed, right? And to ask the author questions. That's not to say that libraries don't host events and things like that. They totally do. But when you check out books from a library, you kind of have to return them. With a bookstore, you get to purchase the book and keep it forever. And because the Bronx is Reading is a social good organization where, you buy a book, we give a book. We want to make sure that people who are low income can still walk into the bookstore and walk away with a book. But also, it's just so fun to be in a bookstore and to browse the shelves and to take photos. As you can see, I'm like a book connoisseur. I love books.
It is a different experience, I will say. It kind of has like this cute vibe to it. So I agree 100%. Now we have about a minute left. I understand the Bronx is Reading also has a book club. Can you quickly tell me about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a book club where we meet normally at the Andrew Freeman home once a month or outdoors in a park. And we read a book and we discuss it, and anyone's invited. Not last year, excuse me. The last 2 years, we had to pivot and do it virtually, but we will be doing it in person again. So if you would like to sign up, you can, follow us on Instagram, on TikTok, anywhere on social. We're at The Bronx is Reading. We announce our monthly book club picks monthly, and I can actually give you guys a sneak peek. This June, we will be reading Love Radio by Ebony Liddell. So be sure to follow our social media and our newsletter so you can figure out will we be meeting so that we can discuss the book in person.
All right, that's so wonderful, Saraciea. Thank you so much for joining me.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. New York City taxi, Uber, and Lyft drivers are an integral part of our city, but many drivers are finding it difficult to make a decent living following the effects of inflation. Executive Director for the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, Bhairavi Desai, joins me to discuss the efforts needed to support these drivers. Bhairavi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us.
So, can you tell me about your organization, the New York Taxi Worker Alliance?
Sure, we are a labor organization of over 25,000 members. We represent drivers from across the industry, whether they're driving yellow cab, Uber, Lyft, livery, green cab, or corporate black car. Um, and we've been fighting for this raise for drivers across the board.
Now, how has the workforce in your field been affected by inflation?
Oh, and I mean, we know every American's been suffering, right? Because the price of bread and milk have gone up. In fact, the price of food is the highest it's been in 40 years, and each cost keeps going up for 17 straight months now. So drivers are affected in that way, like every other American. But they're also affected because every day they begin in a negative, and so they're paying for the cost of fuel and other operating expenses on the vehicle, including like vehicle leasing, insurance, repairs, and all of those expenses have also gone up because of inflation.
Now, according to your research, drivers are looking at paying $5,000 more for fuel by the end of the year. Why are we seeing such an increase?
Yes, that's right. Just on the cost of fuel alone, they're looking at paying $5,000 more this year than compared to last year. One can argue that really after, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that, because of the war, that the gas prices really started to skyrocket. But it's also because we have a situation where, the oil companies, the producers have not been regulated. And so even though the cost for them has actually not gone up, they have increased the cost on the consumer. And so professional drivers, like drivers, are, really getting hit by it.
Now, what has been done to address the increase?
Well, nothing much as of now. I tell you that, for example, Uber and Lyft actually enacted voluntarily a gas surcharge across the country. But the one group of drivers that they left out are New York City drivers. So if you can imagine, drivers working in, one of the most expensive cities in the world, and drivers who are really the breadbasket of these companies. New York City is the one place where they profit, you know, um, and it's the one group of drivers that they're actually punishing. So while Uber and Lyft drivers have been left out by the companies, compared to every other city, yellow cab, green cab drivers have not had an increase on the meter, not just, recently because of the spike in fuel, but generally they've not had an increase on the meter in 10 years.
Wow. So I kind of want to go into talking about, I guess, some of the similarities and what these groups are fighting for. But before we jump into that, can you explain the difference between Uber and Lyft versus maybe a New York taxi? I think that we kind of all we just want to get where we're going. But I would like to know the difference in how that operates.
Sure. So, all of these services are regulated by the Taxi Limousine Commission, which is a mayoral agency. So Uber and Lyft are considered black cars by TLC regulation, which what that means is that they cannot pick up street hails. Yellow cabs are the only ones authorized to pick up a street hail across the entire city, including the airports. Green cabs can pick up, or they're what we call dual service. It means that they are dispatched like Uber and Lyft are, and they can also pick up street hails, but only above like East 96th Street and West 110th Street in Manhattan. Below that they cannot pick up street hails, and at the airports they cannot pick up. So in order for Uber and Lyft to be considered black cars, over 90% of their revenue must be electronic, meaning it cannot be cash. So those are really the, I think from a consumer perspective, those are like the very minor differences. There are differences as far as the industry is concerned in terms of the number of inspections you can go through. For example, yellow cabs, the cars have a mandatory retirement. So every 6 or 7 years, they must be retired. There's also a requirement that 50% of yellow cabs must be wheelchair accessible. Whereas on the black car, livery, green cab side, all combined they're all regulated under a framework called for hire vehicle. FHVs can basically share their wheelchair accessible dispatching. But yellow cabs, it was a court settlement between the city and disability rights organizations several years ago, which with the Taxi Workers Alliance really supported. And many of these organizations are our strongest allies, and so we've been in favor of more accessibility across this industry, and particularly really supporting the yellow cab accessibility mandate.
All right, thank you so much for clarifying that because I was a little bit curious. So thank you. Now, why have Uber, Lyft, and taxi drivers began rallying?
We've started rallying because, the cost of inflation is at a record high. They're going to be spending $5,000 more on gasoline. That's out of pocket. Yellow cabs have not had a raise in 10 years. Uber and Lyft drivers got a very modest increase of 5.3%. So I'm sorry, I should just explain. So the TLC regulates, of course, the yellow and green cab meter, right? Which is what yellow and green cab services can charge to the passenger. The TLC also regulates what is the minimum per minute and per mile that Uber and Lyft must pay to the drivers. That was a historic first across this country. I think most people know by now Uber and Lyft are really infamous for very low pay. According to a study, an independent study that the city commissioned in 2018, more than 96% of the drivers were found to earn, below like a $15 minimum wage per hour working for Uber and Lyft. It's a race to the bottom. Drivers have been in deep poverty and lifelong debt. And the past 10 years, especially for the yellow cab sector, where they've lost so much ridership while expenses have gone up, have really been tragic. We've seen 9 driver suicides, 2017, 2018. We see thousands of our members that are in a debt that is really beyond their lifetime. And I'm not just talking about the medallion debt for yellow cabs, because I think as most New Yorkers know, the number you see on top of a yellow cab is the medallion number, which is a license from the city of New York that gives a yellow cab exclusivity for street hail pickups. It peaked at $1 million at the same time that the city allowed in Uber and Lyft, essentially unregulated. And Uber and Lyft then really saturated the market with vehicles. I mean, there's a cap on the number of yellow cabs, for example. There had not been one on Uber and Lyft cars. Mm-hmm. And so all of this has led to, really serious economic crisis for the drivers.
I want to know, I heard that a lot of Bronxites attended the rally. Why do you think it was so crucial, for many Bronx drivers to be present?
Many of our members live in the Bronx, particularly, Uber and Lyft drivers. I mean, they're the majority drivers in the industry now. But, many drivers, while they might, work across the city, particularly in Manhattan, they're living in the Bronx. The rents that they're having to pay in the Bronx. They're trying to raise their children in the Bronx. You cannot do any of this without earning a livable, dignified living. And so it's been crucial. We know that the Bronx has the most poverty of all the boroughs across our city. What I would actually say is this is an issue, the driver pay and the reality that there's so many drivers just barely making it, and now because of inflation are falling, into poverty wages. This is an issue that all Bronx representatives and leaders should really be concerned about. Many of our members are people that live and support the small businesses in the Bronx. They support the communities. When they're not able to pay their rent, they're not able to shop locally. All of that has a ripple effect across our borough. And, I'm also a proud Bronxite. Has a ripple effect across our borough. And we are the one borough that cannot sustain it when you look at our high levels of poverty already.
Now, I think this is super important, just for everyone. New Yorkers often take their frustration out on ride service and taxi drivers for prices. But can you explain how much or how little say these drivers have on the prices that are being asked of riders? And how should people actually react to that?
Oh, drivers have no say on the price. First of all, for Uber and Lyft, the prices are completely controlled by the companies. We know that right now, Uber and Lyft are charging passengers more than they ever have. And just so you all know, the drivers don't see that money. Drivers are paid at a static rate of per mile and per minute. And so, even if Uber is charging you more, Lyft is charging you more, it's not, the lion's share is not going to the driver. Similarly, yellow and green cab drivers, the price is set, on the meter, which is regulated by the city of New York, one that hasn't gone up in 10 years, by the way. Um, Livery black car drivers, also the prices are set by the companies and often, by private contracts, for example, on the black car side.
Now, how can people stay up to date with your organization just so they can learn a little bit more about this?
So we are online at nytwa.org. We're also pretty active on Twitter. It's at NYTWA. Um, we cannot win real justice for working people without the support of communities, whether it's drivers or messengers or, you know, building janitors. Whatever workforce, we need the support of the public for people to earn a dignified living. We live under really gross economic inequality in our country and very high levels of poverty. Working people, when you're putting in like drivers 60 to 70 hours of work a week,
Mhm.
it's just unconscionable that anybody would be under poverty.
Well, Bhairavi, thank you so much for joining me and just explaining, everything that you did today. I really learned a lot. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kibin, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.